In this video, we're going to discuss the characteristics of a monopoly market. The basic assumptions of the monopoly market are that there's a single seller of a product for which there's no close substitutes, there are effective barriers to entry that restricts other firms from entering the market, and because the firm is essentially the only firm in the market, it has some control over its price. We noted in the market for perfect competition, firms were price takers. Monopoly firms, though, are price setters or price searchers. They get to choose what price will give them their maximum profit. The general categories of barriers to entry are natural monopoly, exclusive ownership of a resource, legal barriers, trade secrets, or anti-competitive practices by firms. Let's talk about each of those. A natural monopoly occurs when you have economies of scale over the entire relevant range of production. This long-run average cost curve in this diagram represents the type of cost curve we might expect to see in a natural monopoly. I've illustrated here two short-run average cost curves, one at the short-run average total cost curve labeled SRATC0 and the other at SRATC1. What we observe there is that the larger firm, the firm with more capital, corresponding to SRATC1, is able to produce output at a lower cost per unit. The reason this is called a natural monopoly is imagine we have two sizes of firms in this industry. One characterized by that first short-run average total cost curve, and the other one characterized by the second one on the right. If a small firm is producing at Q0 units of output, the minimum cost it could produce at is P0. But the larger firm is able to produce output at a price of P1. What that means in practice is that big firms can produce output at a lower cost, which allows them to sell the output at a lower price. In the long run, the small firms will be forced to either leave the industry or merge to become larger. If this occurs over a large enough range of the long-run average cost curve, eventually competition among firms will only leave the largest firm as a survivor, because any smaller firm will have higher costs, and the larger firm could effectively drive them out of business by simply lowering the price of the product. The first use of the term natural monopoly was used to describe AT&T in the early portion of the 20th century. Alexander Graham Bell's patents had expired, and other companies were starting to appear. But what happened is that each company had to string its own sets of copper wires down each and every street where they provided phone service. If you have, say, one firm that has 2 customers on a given street and another one that has 30 customers on a given street, the cost per customer would be much lower for the larger firm, because once you go through the trouble of putting up the telephone poles or burying the wires and running the copper wires down the street, the cost per customer is much lower if you have more customers. So whichever firm was largest in a given market was able essentially to undercut the prices of the smaller firms, forcing the small firms to leave the industry. Notice that trying to force competition would result in higher costs and higher prices to customers. So what the government tends to do in a case of natural monopoly is it tends to regulate the monopoly, allowing the monopoly to exist, but regulating the prices that are charged. We'll come back to that in a later video. The main point is, in a natural monopoly, it's really efficient to only have a monopoly because smaller firms would not be able to produce output at the same low cost per unit. Going back to the case of AT&T, AT&T's monopoly effectively ended when there were innovations in the provision of telecommunication services that effectively eliminated some of the economies of scale. The development of microwave relay stations, satellite transmissions, and digital switching networks allowed smaller firms to compete at a roughly even footing with larger firms, allowing more firms to successfully compete in the telecommunications industry. We still see a natural monopoly in the distribution of electricity and natural gas, as well as local cable services. And all those are monopolies that are regulated by the government to limit their ability to charge high prices and receive monopoly profit. Another way in which a firm could have a monopoly is to have exclusive ownership of a raw material. For a very long time, De Beers had a monopoly in the supply of high-quality diamonds. There aren't very many cases of this, but if one firm has exclusive ownership of a resource and no one else has access to it, that can give them monopoly power. There are also some legal barriers. Specifically, Patent law, copyright law, and licensing limit the number of firms that are allowed to produce a product. Let's talk just briefly about the difference between a patent and a copyright. A patent is used for innovation, a unique way of producing output. A copyright is given to some form of creative work, and they both give the holder of the patent or the copyright exclusive rights to sell the product associated with that. Both of those expire over time. Patents expire after 20 years. Copyright law is a little bit messier, but copyrights last much longer. The reason for that is that copyrights are generally issued in cases where there are very close substitutes and there's less likely to be monopoly power. So copyrights are used to protect intellectual property for music, videos, novels, and other things where there are many close substitutes, which limits the ability of the owner of those rights to receive excessive profit. With patents, society faces a difficult trade-off. If you didn't provide patent protection, it would reduce the incentive for individuals and firms to engage in research and development that can result in a new product. We see some very high profits being made by drug companies when their patent is in effect. One of the reasons that's needed is because it's extremely costly to produce new drugs. If we didn't have patent protection and someone spent a lot of time researching, developing, and testing a new product, and anyone else was allowed to copy it, there'd be no incentive for anyone to do the original research and development. Everyone would have an incentive to wait for someone else to do it and just simply copy that. Patents are designed to provide an incentive to engage in research and development that can create new products that benefit society or new production techniques that benefit society. Copyrights provide an incentive for the creation of creative works that we all enjoy when we read novels, when we watch movies, when we listen to music, or when we view other forms of creative work that we all receive some benefits from. The government also provides exclusive licensing in some cases. For example, in national parks, the government will provide an exclusive license to a firm to run food concessions or perhaps lodging concessions. Similarly, the states that own thruways, for example, will often auction off the rights for gas stations or restaurants to operate in rest areas on a thruway, for example, like the New York State Thruway. And those firms effectively have some degree of monopoly power because they're the only places you can buy gas or food without leaving the thruway. Another way in which firms may receive monopoly power is by preserving trade secrets. Coca-Cola has never patented its formula for Coca-Cola. Instead, they've maintained a secret recipe, or actually a series of secret recipes, because they've changed the formulation several times for Coca-Cola. And by doing that, they don't have to worry about the patent expiring and allowing other people to duplicate that. In practice, attempting to keep trade secrets is not terribly effective because it's typically possible to use chemical analysis or reverse engineering to duplicate products if they have not been patented. Firms can also engage in a variety of anti-competitive practices. These are business practices that are designed to restrict entry into a market. One type is predatory pricing, and that's where a large firm will charge lower prices in any market where other firms are competing with it, and then once they drive out the competitors, they raise their prices back up. If you have a firm that's highly profitable, it can afford to charge a price where it's losing money to drive out competitors, which allows it to receive even higher profits in the long run. Another type of practice is a tying contract, and that is where you agree to sell one product to retailers if they agree to buy some of your other products as well. That was something that Microsoft was accused of quite a while back now, where if you bought Windows, that automatically came with Internet Explorer, and they also made it difficult to install other web browsers. And that's an example where when you buy one of their products, you're effectively constrained to use one of their others. Another type of practice is something called exclusive dealing, where a firm will issue a contract that says, we'll sell you this product as long as you only agree to buy your products from us and not from any other firms. Each of these things serves to limit competition, and there's a variety of others as well. And those are discussed in your readings on antitrust policy. Before we leave this discussion of what monopoly is, there's a couple of other things we should consider. One is that we have to be careful in how we define a market. For example, the government brought charges against DuPont Cellophane, who are the producers of Saran Wrap, on the grounds that they controlled most of the market for plastic wrap. DuPont argued in court, and this went all the way to the Supreme Court, that they actually had a small share of the overall wrap market. They noted that there was also aluminum foil, paper wrap, and wax paper. What they noted is that Saran Wrap constituted a very small share of the overall market for products that you could use to wrap food in. And just as an aside, they used evidence on the cross-price elasticities of demand in a court case to challenge the definition of whether there were close substitutes, and they actually won that case, and it was found that the relevant market was a market for food wrapping products and not just the market for plastic wrap. So when we define products, we have to be careful how narrowly or how broadly we define them when we're trying to evaluate the extent to which a given market may be a monopoly. Another thing we should think about is that there may be many firms in a market, but in any given locality, there may only be one firm. For example, in many local communities, there may only be one company that's providing poured cement because it's costly to move cement in cement mixing trucks large distances. So if you want to buy cement in many communities, there's really only one firm that can supply it at a reasonable cost because of the high cost of transporting the good. So in that case, even though there may be tens of thousands of companies out there selling cement in a small town or a small community, there may be effectively only one firm. Similarly, local newspapers may be effectively a monopolist in the market for local news. So when we consider the market, we have to define what the market is, both in terms of how consumers treat their product, in terms of whether there are substitutes or not, and also what sort of geographical area we're considering when we define the market shares for a given firm.